And we are here at NASRO 2023, and we have Coffee with Kelly live in person. So I will introduce our main host, Kelly.
Hello, Ethan. How
Hi,
are you
Kelly.
today?
It's great to be doing this, face to face.
NASRO School Safety Conference.
Yeah.
The 33rd. School, and we're also here with NASRO's president, Rudy Perez. Rudy, why don't you introduce yourself and give us a little bit about how you got here?
Well, I'll tell you one thing. My name is Rudy Perez. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm excited to partner with you guys and see so many people in the world of school safety. I started with NASRO in 2011. I attended my first conference, and you realize that you meet people with the same synergy that have the passion to protect kids, right? The vision and mission is to protect kids. It wasn't more the enforcement portion of it, but it's how do you create a location and a place where kids can graduate safely.
Right.
So I came to this conference and I said, look, I want to be part of this. I want to be part of this organization. How do I get on the board? How do I jump on? And I ended up running for the board. I oversaw Region 9, which was California, Nevada, Oregon, Hawaii, which I got to visit.
So, we talked a little bit before, and I did my research on you, and you come from a small district, right?
Yes, I did. I did 23 years in Los Angeles, right? And with the LAUSD, I'll give you the numbers on it just because it's fresh on. So you're talking about 500,000 students, over 40,000 employees, 710 miles of jurisdiction, 1,500 locations. So it's a pretty big beast.
So how big was your department?
My department, it's interesting you say that. So I'm going to discuss a little bit on the challenges where we're living out right now, especially is do SROs make safe? Before the pandemic, we were at about 590 officers, fully staffed in some other areas. And then the pandemic hit, the issues with SROs being on campus. We took a defund, went to 300 police officers.
Wow. Yeah,
so we lost a lot of really good cops because of bad policy making. And I mean, now we're living the repercussions of that.
Right. So as you mentioned, this particular podcast is really attacking that mindset and answering the question, do SROs make schools safer? And, there's been a lot of conversation in the last 3-4 years about that, and a lot of decisions that were from my knee-jerk type decision, right? And so my experience, as most people know, is 34 years in law enforcement in Santa Barbara. So I was with the sheriff's office up there. And so when we're talking about this transition, because you mentioned earlier that they're starting to bring them back.
Yeah.
And how does, specifically, how are they, you defunded all of those positions, how are they getting those back? And how are they making that a priority? And kind of what was the impetus for that?
Well, okay, so obviously we come back from a situation that occurred in the Midwest that changed law enforcement. A lot of agencies decided, like you said, knee-jerk reaction. The way that we are coming back is there's a lot of people being hurt by bad policy making, right? Not only being hurt, probably killed. At least in Los Angeles, I can tell you that bad policy making created a vacuum of officers not wanting to be school resource officers anymore, right? Because why would I want to work in a place where I'm not being supported, right? Where there was a narrative of lying that officers were using force, officers were doing silly things along the way that were all lies. And unfortunately, people believed it. But the truth came out is that wasn't the truth. And after bad policy making, we saw crime skyrocket. We saw weapons in schools skyrocket. And now leadership is looking at this and going, wait a minute, we got to stop and maybe we need to look back and fix some of these things. New York is returning, right? We did some training for New York. Florida is a strong organization. Texas is bringing them as a mandatory legislation. You got Tennessee that just dropped $240 million to bring them back. You have organizations back in the South Bay cities of California. We want our SROs back. But the challenge is this. every agency is hurting for bodies.
Right.
So there's a vacuum of officers saying, "No, I don't know if I want to be a police officer anymore." Right.
So this, like I said, 34 years, retired commander from Santa Barbara County Sheriff's Office, and loved my career. Absolutely loved it. And what we really were looking at, this is the first time in the history of Kelly Moore where, people who've come up to me and asked, should I do this for a career? I'm not inclined to say, because we, as old school people, I started it back in '86.
Yeah.
It was, we exist based upon the support of our communities.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
And we know that there will always be a percentage of that community who doesn't like us, right? And so we said, as long as we can continue to have that support, we will make do with what we have, as long as we have that support. Right. But when the politics started to overtake, and now common sense, right? Politics are such that we are looking at cops doing the right thing, and the public and the politics, they prosecute.
That's right. So you're talking about the ecosystem that's been disturbed.
Yep.
Right. So you look at a community where you have an ecosystem, and what they did is they removed the law enforcement portion that addressed ecosystem issues, right? Mm-hmm. And wraparound services, mental health, none of that respond to the issues that need a law enforcement cop, right? Now, I'm not saying, and take this to note, I'm not saying I don't want more counselors. I want more counselors. I want more mental health workers. I want more teachers and everybody to be, but it's not in lieu of.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
It's not in replacement of the law enforcement officer.
So this is where people don't understand the relational properties of the ecosystem. You're taking a major component out of it, completely taking it out. And what happens when you take a major factor? We'll use the lake as an ecosystem, right?
Yeah. And
there's all these different other bioorganisms that live in there.
They will take over it.
But if I take the water out of it,
it's going to die.
It's done.
It's done.
It's done, right?
And we are getting to that point. I think we've gone to that place, and now policy is in a place where we can turn it around. We can make better policy. We can look at each other and say, okay, maybe we need to tweak the law enforcement portion, right? For me and you that have been in the job over 20 years, sometimes we say the good old days, right? And we see our young millennial cops that come into play that they don't know what the good old days was.
That's right.
So the change is truly harder for the leadership. Yep. But we're foreseeing the prospect of saying, great, we have to change in the perspective to say, we will change to become a better law enforcement officer to serve the needs of our community, to serve the needs of our schools, right? So as you move forward in leadership now, we have to look at the ecosystem and say, my cops do need mental health training, social and emotional support process, understanding the educational process. And that's where NASRO comes into play.
Right. So, but we also need our school administrators to take that same leadership.
Correct.
Right?
I agree.
So that they understand the roles and responsibilities of our law enforcement and how they interact and how everything are supportive of each other.
That's right. And of the ecosystem.
Of the ecosystem, right?
But so you're right. So like one thing we're talking about now is NASRO being one of those things that brings that training, where you bring your administrator, you bring your school counselor, you bring your law enforcement officer in a place where it's creating synergy. At least we're all on the same page.
Right.
What is behavioral issue? What is criminal issue, right? So now we understand what are those aspects and how to clean those aspects out.
Well, and so somebody asked me when I was with Santa Barbara Unified Schools as their safety quarter, it said, why do you understand threat assessments and behaviors and stuff? I said, I just spent 34 years dealing with behaviors.
That's right.
And so when you take somebody whose profession, even though it's called law enforcement, we are actually dealing with behaviors.
Correct.
Right? And this is like asking a parent, how are you a good parent? Right? It's because that's what you do
that's what
day
I do,
in and day out. So when I look at threat assessments, every interaction I do was a threat assessment.
That's right.
Right. And so I'm looking at somebody, I'm seeing what their body language is, I'm seeing how they're verbalizing, how their nonverbals are going, and so forth.
Well, the same, you were profiling criminal behavior if you needed to, right?
Right.
That's what we're trained to do and see.
And so when you look at that in the school setting,
correct,
and understanding, and how are you getting the administration and the district leadership on board with that?
So what we've created is we've actually created synergy portions of intentional trainings for administrators, intentional trainings for our mental health workers. We have an AMHT class that we teach, and you don't have to be a law enforcement officer. We have the ability to come in and do specific training for people.
Right.
We have the ability to engage in training, not only at a local level, but as you're seeing so many things, Brazil's here in NASRO. Yeah. We have Brazil, we have the UAE, Dubai are here, right? They're seeing the U.S. is doing something to get into it, early prevention, early intervention process.
Right.
And how do we mimic that? And that's why some of these organizations are here.
Yeah. Wow. So I'm going to give a little plug to Crisis Go, because they're the ones that actually paid the bills, right? So when we talk about ecosystem, we've developed a system basically that allows us to be that connective tissue, so that you can talk to your school and everyone's on the same sheet of music. Yeah. Everyone understands that. And because when we look at all of the different systems that are in there, we talk about behavior, intervention, assessments, and all of that stuff. And we look at the disciplinary process. We look at the restorative processes. Those systems don't always mesh well.
Oh, no, they don't.
Right?
And they don't.
So what are your challenges within the school district with getting those systems to work together?
Well, it was a big challenge. I was a detective for threat assessments for close to 10 years. Mm-hmm. Probably one of the best jobs I had. And it was the ability to see, how do we see a threat? How do I track the threat? Mm-hmm. What are the responses? How are we getting wraparound services to a student or even an adult on campus, right? So it's very difficult to see that.
Yeah. So when we look at that question, how do we, for lack of a better term, how do we engineer violence out of this, right? How do we make the schools safer? A lot of times we look at securing the building, right? But especially in Los Angeles, I'm imagining that a lot of your
perimeters,
good strong perimeters, but you have a lot of issues outside of that perimeter as well.
And that's probably more my challenge that you would see in LA was the issues outside affecting schools.
Right, across the street, right, or in the park next door.
The gang shooting the day before, then now it's going to bleed into your schools. Whether it's the robberies that are going around the school, because there is we talked about the district attorneys, right? The reward of committing a crime is outweighing the punishment, right? Those are issues you're seeing now across the country.
Yeah. So, what do you look at because we're going to get into your new job a little bit, because that's where you're in Minneapolis area or something.
Yeah, I am.
So give us a little bit about that, and then I'll ask you my question.
I recently retired from Los Angeles after 22 years of serving, and I retired as a lieutenant, overseeing the South Central area divisions of the schools, and very challenging but very rewarding. Really good amount of great officers. I got an offer at Golden Valley Police Department, where I just became an assistant chief, and it's really cool to see and shift the portion of administration now. More my administrative position now. I get to oversee the SRO program there. It's a phenomenal police department. It's starting from the ground up, so I get a brand new canvas to see how I can.
So you're the first assistant chief?
I'm one of the two assistant chiefs.
Oh,
there. Yeah.
Awesome. So, Golden Valley just the name sounds like it's a better place. Right?
Well, we walk around saying, "Did you have a Golden Valley day?" Right?
Right.
And it is true. It's a great place. But I am the border to Minneapolis, where George Floyd got killed.
Right.
So that bleeds into our city all the time.
Oh yeah. We're familiar with Minneapolis. But so we're moving forward, and your challenges are going to be different, obviously.
Yeah.
But what for the SROs themselves? What are their major challenges going to be in the next 3, 5, 10 years?
Well, I think some of the challenges we'll see as SROs is technology. And sometimes some of our SROs are more seasoned. You would say that, the transition into technology or using AI information that's going to be very helpful to us, how to use it and how to be responsible toward that. But I think technology is the number one game changer in SRO worlds, where it's going to be, let's take some analytics, let's read behavioral things, let's put it into a system. Maybe it can give us some answers that we're not seeing. So I see that as a challenge to new SROs, but I think administrations need to continue to understand what is criminal behavior versus normal student behavior.
Right.
Know?
I think I think you're right about the technology, and I'll talk to you more offline about that. But I think you're right. Technology is going to be a challenge with the intent to make it better.
That's right.
Right.
It is.
So there's a good
facial recognition.
Right.
You got LPRs on our schools.
Yeah. And so
what are they going to be okay with?
One of the experiences I've had, and we'll start wrapping this up, is I think we will.
Yeah.
Depends on the
no, I got to get going.
Yeah. But where we have the smaller districts and that really rely on their SRO as the safety coordinator for their district, I don't think that that's really what your guys' position is, that they should be that. They should be there for that advice and stuff. But they really shouldn't be that person who's responsible for all of the safety there.
Well, there's two things, right? And what is the small town, rural school? I don't think they have the resources that other schools do. So you got force multipliers in different areas, right? You gotta use your SRO for that school safety plan. Or how do you bring in the fire department? How do you bring the response services going? What does this look like if we do have an issue here?
Right.
I don't think specifically sometimes we're designed for it, but I think your SRO, a properly trained, properly equipped, and a properly selected SRO, and I say my plug-in is use NASRO training. I believe NASRO training is the number one training in this country that will prepare your officer to be there. Yeah.
Does NASRO train in emergency management and response? So that's my biggest issue, right? Is if you have an actual active shooter, their primary response or their primary role is the response, the initial response to that, right?
Correct.
And if you're responding, you're likely going to be involved in a shooting.
Into it, yeah.
Right?
In it, yeah.
And then you're taken out of the management of that.
That comes back to leadership,
right?
That comes back to a leadership as a commanding officer in Santa Barbara. You understood that.
Yeah.
I think Uvalde is a perfect example of the lack of leadership, the lack of resources, the lack of commanding resources. You have every resource in that location, right? But you didn't have a leader commanding it in an EAP or a command post saying, hey, hold on, we need a contact team, we need to get in there, asking the questions that needed to be answered.
Or looking at what was given to them.
That's right.
And then
make an assessment.
So I'm going to, from this, I'll leave it with this. I think generally speaking, if as a leader, I let my trained officers address the problem, then that problem is going to be taken care of fairly quickly, because that's what they do day in and day out.
Seconds.
And then everything else is what we're going to be.
It's the recovery process.
The recovery, all of that management.
Reunification, it's all recovery.
The management of that, right?
The management portion of it.
That's what we get judged on.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
So I think that's where we have to really look at bringing in good managers.
That's right.
Good
leaders.
Bringing in your fire departments, bringing in
That's right.
Your other resources, your mental health, bringing all those people in and saying, how are we going to manage this?
That's right.
And how are we going to train ourselves to be ready for that?
That's right.
So I appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks for the opportunity. I think safety is it's not only the SRO's perspective, but it's everybody.
Yeah.
Whether it's your counselor, your teacher, your parent.
Right.
Right. I mean,
School safety is
everybody's job.
It's a shared responsibility,
Thank
right?
you. I appreciate the time here.
Yeah, I appreciate you coming. And
thank you.
You are our first official guest. Take a listen to some of our podcasts.
I will.
Because we address, twice a month. We address those issues, and I come at it from that emergency management. So
nice to meet you.
I appreciate it. Have a great conference.
Thanks.